Welcome to episode 6 of season 3 of Risk Engineers Talk Governance. In this episode, due diligence engineers Richard Robinson and Gaye Francis chat about code of practice and WHS confusion. If you have any feedback or topic ideas, please do get in touch via email admin@r2a.com.au, and don't forget to subscribe on your favourite podcast platform and to give us a rating.
Hi Richard, welcome to another podcast session.
Hi Gaye, good to be back.
Good to be back. Today we're going to talk about the code of practice and WHS confusion, and it's sort of in relation to a presentation that we delivered last week to the Dam Owners and Operators Forum for the Queensland regulator there. And our topic was, there were 4 presenters, and our topic was how do we do ALARP, meeting a duty of care.
And that was with particular regard to the ANCOLD guidelines, and the regulator we're speaking of obviously was the dam safety regulator in Queensland.
Correct. Thank you for that clarification. So do you want to just run through quickly the difference between the code of practice and the WHS requirements?
Yeah, because one of the things we realised about the ANCOLD guidelines, they're trying to do 2 things, and we actually suspect those 2 things at one level are being mandated by the way in which our system set things up, although we would disagree with the sequence in which you do them. Now, the first is the WHS legislation. It basically says identify the critical issues, identify all the possible practical controls, in the circumstances work out what's reasonable, and then do that. The code of practice, which has gone through a parliamentary process and is therefore mandated at another level, and purports to represent an implementation of the WHS legislation, says identify the issue. If for known issues you can just put in recognised good practice, but if you don't know, then you've got to assess the risk before you start looking at the controls, which is the inverse of what the legislation actually calls up. Now, our interpretation of the ANCOLD guidelines is it's basically saying, look, we want you to do in effect what we would call the old way of doing risk assessment, likelihood and consequence, and potentially comparing that to criteria. And then you're going to do the second process. You say, right, doesn't matter what the criteria say, is there anything else we can do? So we would tend to refer to that, I think we were talking about it later, as augmented ALARP or something like that. And obviously it does both processes, and I think the point we make is that, we would have said that's not particularly efficient. We would have said you want to do what the WHS legislation asks first, and then if you want to do the second one, particularly if you're trying to work out what's prohibitively dangerous and whether or not, the way you put it, you can hop in any time here.
Yeah. I think it also, we talked about it before, and it's that safety in design review and just putting in recognised good practice or standards that you're not looking for anything new or novel that you can do.
Yep.
And we've used the one that we use for the dam break is that, the current controls to make sure that the dam integrity stays intact and all of that sort of thing is to do regular inspections of the dam to make sure that there's been no movement that can be seen and things like that. And we're saying, well, maybe there's some technology out there that you could monitor the side of a dam, and if there's any movement in it, then that could be, send alarms. And
that was that LiDAR-based ground probe system.
Correct.
And obviously I'd only work for a hard-faced dam rather than with grass waving all over it, because that wouldn't work. But that technology would work, and we've used it for railway cuttings and would work really well.
But that technology and solution doesn't exist in any of the guidelines or good practice that we know of to date.
And I haven't had a dam person mention it to me. We've been doing it the other way around. Yeah, I would agree.
So I think, by following the code of practice and the ANCOLD guidelines, it's sort of doing same old, and not looking for that innovation.
Yeah, and the problem you've got is if you start with the sort of target of the risk approach and it turns out to be really low,
what else are you going to do?
It's hard to get yourself motivated looking for anything else that you could do. It sort of puts you in a culturally, you sort of, I don't want to do anything else because it doesn't seem much point.
Well, you're almost in your comfort zone, aren't you?
In effect, that's right.
Yeah.
And you might remember in the presentation, the Oroville Dam spillway break and the, I forget which the other dam was, but in each case the American reviewer is saying they were going to go and test what the design philosophy and cultural attitudes of the design team were when the dam was built, because obviously I mean, we've been through this a number of times before, but in engineering terms, the meanings and the method, you know, the design process will have certain consequences, and if you've got a certain design process, you will get certain consequences. And if you look at this thing from different points of view, you do get different insight.
And I mean, we've touched on this many, many times, haven't we? In our other podcast, risk is multidimensional. And if you cut it different ways, if you look at it from a cultural viewpoint, you get a different insight into if you look at it from a purely technical viewpoint. That dam that you were referring to was the Edenville Dam.
Yeah, that's the other
break.
one. Now, that was the other question, which it pops up a couple of times, because in the Safety Case Guideline, which was one of the particular reasons that the Dam Safety Regulator in Queensland was attracted to us giving a presentation, because he'd found that to be particularly helpful. But those cultural attitudes, the way you get ideas done, I mean, one of the observations we've had, it's not a bad idea to sort of get the community who are at risk and brief them and get their feedback on what it all means. Now, as you pointed out, you know, that doesn't normally happen with dams.
No.
And you'd probably expect that it'd be the council who, in one way, represents the ratepayers and residents downstream of a dam in a particular region, who would probably have the greatest interest in this. Because there's nothing like having to explain, as a dam owner or operator, to a group of residents whom, if the dam goes wrong, have got have a good chance of getting killed. To actually have to explain what you're doing, why you're doing it, it does tighten up the argument, make it a lot more robust, because, you know, the argument, the point we're making, it's the principle of reciprocity. What you've really got to do is explain to them that, you know, as the dam owner and operator, if I was living downstream of the dam, this is what I'd have ensure it would be reasonable. So it's that principle of reciprocity again.
And it provides that transparency that people are looking for, and I think that's what the Dam Safety Regulator was particularly, appealed to them, that sometimes that safety case guideline could be used to establish some of those arguments in a transparent way that could be communicated to those stakeholders.
Well, I think the thing that interests me the most is the last presenter was the General Counsel for one of the large water authorities in Queensland, and she just basically more or less went through the process the way R2A basically says to do it. Identify the issues, look at all the possible practical controls, determine in the circumstances which are reasonable, and do that. Didn't have any problem following the ANCOLD guidelines as well, which was really, from our point of view, a double up, and as we mentioned earlier, from the point of view of establishing whether something's prohibitively dangerous, after you put all your controls in place, it's probably not a bad thing to do anyway. So we're certainly not saying that the ANCOLD guidelines are massively in error or anything like that, but I think the difficulty we have is they're still doing it in the reverse order, but you can see from the way in which the legislation has been written and the code of practice has been written why this confusion exists, because it must exist at very high levels in just about every government agency.
It's in a number of guidelines, isn't it?
That's right.
Sort of that understanding of what they need to do. I think it's also creating a little bit of double up work, or some double up work.
Sure is.
And the process that it takes, and we talked about this in a number of other podcasts, you know, compliance with these guidelines and things like that, we're sort of saying, yeah, have a look at them and check them out, but following them as step-by-step guides usually doesn't meet the obligations of the legislation.
And it certainly doesn't create innovation and create, testing for other new ideas that could be potentially valuable. When you follow a standard, you just design to the standard, and that's that.
And I think that's one of our topics for a podcast to follow this season. So I think, unless you've got any closing comments, Richard, we might wrap this one up for today. So we hope you enjoyed that. It was an interesting presentation. We always enjoy giving these industry-based presentations and that insight. So thanks for joining us today, and hope you can join us next time.
Thank you.